And the Expanse. I liked the Expanse a lot. That was it's all north from here. I think this Expanse was the first show I liked it the most out of all the sci-fi shows I've watched since the Battlestar Galactica Reimagined series in like 2001. The Expanse felt as real to me. Like that show was so well done. Felt like battle. I felt similarly engaged like I did with Battlestar Galactica. Oh, favorite, yeah, favorite author is a tricky one to answer because so many people are like they'll have like one favorite author for everything, and I feel like mine is a little more complex because it's like I have different authors I like for different reasons who I think are equally talented, but they do things in a way that makes me react to their stories differently. So, if you think about, for me, Roger Zelazny has always been my favorite first-person narrative author. If you want a good first-person story, I just feel that Zelazny is like my go-to dude for like the best first-person. Doesn't matter if it's science fiction or fantasy, whatever. First-person stuff, I'm gonna get the most enjoyment out of Zelazny novel, and he's got Lord of Light's good. Road Marks. Mm. Um, I that's the one series of books I didn't sell when I started traveling. I did not sell my Zelazny collection because that took me a long time to collect all my all my Zelazny stuff. I think it's Faces in the Sand, if that's the name of it, if I remember correctly. That was another one of my favorites by him. Um, I'll get to Robert Jordan here in a minute. I'll get to Robert Jordan here in a minute. Um, so for single, for first person Zelazny. Then when you start talking like general sort of omniscient third person or just third person novels in general, um, I think that Tad Williams and Raymond Feist and Terry Brooks, um, I know he did some horrible stuff, but David Eddings, like, even though I realized that his personal life had some very serious things that happened with him and his wife getting found guilty of being not so nice people. I don't think that takes away from the fact that the books, like the Belgariad and so on and so forth, were really like important to me at the time that I read them. Um, just from a literary scope of how do I create a fantasy world. So as I was learning how to become a writer, like those were things that were very influential on me. I'm just tossing out names because I'm trying to remember back, things like that nature. Then when I got into like then as science fiction, it's like Michael A. Stackpole. Like the X-Wing series that he did was so well done. Yub Yub Commander. Like, and I went on to read other stuff by Stackpole, like his Talion Revenant novel is phenomenal from his standalone stuff, and he's done some cool stuff in the tabletop space. Um, Kevin J. Anderson, like fun adventure tales. He writes tons of just fast-paced, easy to chew through, and he's also a beast of a writer. Like the way he does it all with dictation software and his assistant doing the text, voice to text stuff. Um, but then I discovered Robert Jordan when I was like 13 or 14, and that sort of it unlocked this whole world of, oh, I could write this epic third person limited, and around the same time that I discovered Jordan, I think it was a couple years after I discovered Jordan, maybe 3 years after, I discovered George R. R. Martin with the first Game of Thrones novel. And I suddenly was like, oh, wow, now I've got these two massive fantasy worlds that are unfolding, which are both using that third person limited perspective, but they're being told in completely different ways. Like Robert Jordan was more the PG-13, and then over here George R. R. Martin was coming and swinging with like a hard R, possibly X-rated, type of adventure that was just it was such a juxtaposition of styles to be reading those two books at the same time. But then, coming out of that, I've always said that if you read my very first fantasy novel, which was the Echoes of the Past, which was the Saga of Lucemia series, which is what we're redoing right now. We're redoing that on Patreon. Um, that for me was like maybe 50% Robert Jordan, and then a little bit of Raymond Feist, and a little bit of Tad Williams, and a little bit of Terry Brooks. Like some of my favorite like things that I was really inspired by from other places and styles. Like I loved, and I've used it through multiple iterations now, but I love the idea of the Thieves Guild that Raymond Feist had with Jimmy the Hand and everything in the first Rift War Saga novels, right? And so I took that idea years and years and years ago when I was a kid, you know, I first read this, and I was like, oh, that's awesome. And when I came to start creating my own stuff, I came up with the idea of the Blackbirds. And the Blackbirds to me actually showed up in the sci-fi anthology that someone was asking about earlier that I dropped, Bloody Knuckles. One of my short stories in there features a character named Donovan. And this is one of the first short stories I had written when I first started writing like full time. And in that short story, there's mention of he runs an information organization called the Blackbirds, and that was the first iteration of that in a science fiction setting. And then I brought it back in the World of Lucemia for the Thieves Guild as the Ravens, you know, and the Blackbird and everything else. And um, the original inspiration for that was just looking at how much I had loved the way the Thieves Guild operated in the Raymond Feist novels. And then the way I wrote that first book was very much Robert Jordan infused with Tad Williams. Like it was a blending of the two because I if I could emulate either one of those guys and create something that's enjoyable to read, I'm a happy person. Um, but yeah, I you guys got me on a rant tonight. I have a deep love of I don't do nearly as much reading as I used to, and it's because now I like watching TV shows. I love the 8 episode mini arc where Chris and I can come in and watch something, either binge it over 2 days or we can come in and watch it over the course of a few weeks. I very much like the TV format these days. I don't do a lot of reading because most of my time is spent here doing this for a living. But I've been talking a lot about what am I doing after this, and I think the objective when I turn 50 is I want to be to the point where I'm gonna go back to writing full time when I'm as long as things go as planned, I'll go back to writing full time then, and I'll once I do that, I'll start reading again. Because Chris and I have talked about like, do we put a library here? And neither one of us wants to put an indoor library here because of the problems where we live is tropical, and there's constant issues with termites and moisture, and it's just not a great place to have like a book library or anything like that. So we're waiting until we buy our next property, which we're currently working towards, and that's going to be up in the mountains where it's far more climate controlled. And once we get up there, um, it's going to be time to turn it back on. When I sold my book collection, I had 1,200 books in it, and that was when I left to travel full time. So I sold about 800, um, gave away about 400 in my local library, and then about 200 I kept, and those are in boxes at my sister's place. It's like all my I've got a John Carter of Mars with like a flawless Michael Whelan cover set that took me like I don't know how many years. I paid way too much for it, but it was totally worth it. I have that box set. I have all my first edition Robert Jordan hardbacks. I've got signed books from Terry Brooks and some other guys. Um, I used to be really big because again, I grew up before there was internet, so that's all I used to do was read. Just read, 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 read. Backtrack says currently finishing up The Great Hunt by Robert Jordan, trying to keep track of the side characters. It's a lot to keep up with. Yeah, that's good luck with that.
Greetings. Farewell. May your days bring you joy.
I was pretty conscious of that when I was writing Echoes of the Past. I tried to keep it down to like less than I think it was 6 or less characters. I think I ended up with, if I think about this, I had Prince, her, well, I think I had six. I had 6 characters. And I had 5, and then I added a sixth by the second book. And then with because I was writing it third person omniscient for Rising Storm over the last couple of years through Patreon, because it was in a Dragonlance style of like that. everybody. You see it in everybody's head. I wasn't worried about so much about narrative. I was just worried about a fast-paced moving story, which is instead of having 7,000 word chapters, I had 2,500 word chapters, so it was a very quick, fast-paced read, and it was an 80,000 word novel, so it was just, that's a quick read. It's just a quick, fun adventure. Um, but that was written completely differently because I was seeing in the heads of all the characters, so we're just giving snippets, and you might get a little longer narrative from one character in one chapter versus another character in another one, but I never wanted to focus on like all the inner thoughts and turmoil and other stuff that, when I'm playing around with, 6,000 word, 10,000 word chapters, there's a lot of room for me to just sort of bleed onto the page whatever's running through my mind. But when I'm trying to keep it condensed into a 2,500 word chapter, it's got to be streamlined so that you're still getting the point across, but you're moving very quickly from point A to point B. But it just depends on what you're hoping to achieve with the experience. So I much prefer working in the longer format, but it's good to get out of your comfort zone and do different things. One of the reasons I'm having so much fun with the sci-fi anthology we're working on right now, is because it pushes me out of my comfort zone. Because I'm not a huge short story writer. I've done it, but it's not my jam. It's not my wheelhouse. But because this was something where I could tie all these plots in together, what I'm treating it as is essentially I'm just writing chapters, and each chapter focuses on different characters. So as long as I have a middle end and middle, a beginning, middle, and end by the end of it, I'm happy with that. Whether it's 4,000 words or 8,000 words or whatever it ends up being for short stories. Dude, the Children of the Light are creepy, creepy, creepy. But like you said, key figures show that it's the extremists. It's no different than our real world religions, and it's no different. It's no different. It's the same thing. Like there are there are good things about all of them, and there are also horrifically bad things about all of them. Scary things.
Hello.
Challenge the
May the
patriarch.
mists protect you.
That one hand punch or whatever is such an awesome ability. It's like, nope, boom, you're done. A small cast can be personal, but it depends on what you're writing. So like with the Rising Storm, I think we had 5 characters in the main original in the part 1, and then we added 2 more in part 2. So the rest of the novel was 7 characters. That's enough. I don't need more than 7. I feel like more than 7 is unmanageable. Um, I think that in the first, it's a little easier to deal with when you're writing from first person, because if you're writing from first person, you're forced to only use the perspective of one character. Um, but I think you should keep it under 6 is best. Anything beyond 6, it gets really tricky to keep a track of, because also, you might find yourself as a writer starting to like one character more than another. Even though it's your job to tell the story, it's like certain characters come to you, at least for me, certain characters come to me more naturally than other characters. Like other characters are definitely I have to work for it. Like I have to pull it out and get it on paper. Like it's not, and then other characters, I'm already in the headset, so it's like I'm already in that mindset of like, oh, this is exactly what they're thinking and this is what they're saying, and brilliant. It's, in 30 minutes I've put down 3 or 4 times as much content, as much material as I might have written for another character, because I'm able to connect with that character more easily. But that's just how it works for me anyway. Um, so, but a smaller cast is better. Your theory is if you can run a D&D campaign with your cast, it tends to be received well.
I need to target something first.
It can be, but some people also write really bad D&D stuff. That's also true.